My name is James Harrison Jr., and this is one of the stories my grandfather told me a few years ago. The moon cast an eerie glow on the dense clouds as Lieutenant James Harrison flew his night patrol over the French countryside. It was 1944, and the war had taken its toll on everyone involved. Every mission was a gamble with fate, but this night would test my grandfather in ways he could never have imagined. As he soared above the fields and villages, the familiar buzz of his Spitfire's engine was a small comfort. The war had become a part of him, ingrained into his very soul. Each flight carried the weight of the men he had lost, the comrades who had fallen from the sky in flames. And tonight, that weight would press down harder than ever. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a glimmer, something out of place in the night sky. As he focused on the distant speck, it became clear. It was a Messerschmitt Bf 109, the feared German fighter plane. But this one was different. It was damaged, smoke trailing from its engine, its body riddled with holes. It shouldn't have been able to fly, yet there it was, matching his altitude, moving in eerie synchronization with his own plane. Instinct took over as my grandfather tightened his grip on the controls, his pulse quickening. He'd been in dogfights before, but there was something unsettling about this one. The German plane seemed to defy the laws of physics, maintaining its speed and altitude despite its obvious damage. As he prepared to engage, something stopped him. The cockpit glass of the Messerschmitt was shattered, and through the broken shards, my grandfather saw a face that was unmistakably human, yet hollow, like a man who had long given up hope. The pilot's eyes locked onto his, and in that instant, recognition struck. It was the face of a German ace, a pilot my grandfather had downed in combat just a few weeks prior. Harrison had thought the man dead, consumed by the flames that had engulfed his plane as it spiraled to the ground. Yet here he was, flying alongside him as if nothing had changed. Confusion battled with fear in my grandfather's mind. Was it a trick of the light, a figment of his exhausted imagination? Or had the pilot somehow survived, now returning for vengeance? Without warning, the Messerschmitt banked sharply and dived, the maneuver forcing my grandfather into action. He followed, the two planes weaving through the night sky in a deadly dance. It was a chase unlike any he had experienced before. The German pilot was skilled, almost inhumanly so, anticipating every move Harrison made, leading him into increasingly dangerous situations. The tension built as the two planes twisted and turned, the ground below a blur. My grandfather's focus narrowed to a singular point, the German plane. He could feel the sweat dripping down his face, his muscles aching from the strain of maintaining control. Each second felt like an eternity as they hurtled towards what seemed like an inevitable collision. Then, in a flash, the German plane suddenly disappeared into the thick clouds ahead. Harrison's heart pounded in his chest as he pulled up, trying to avoid the same fate. He scanned the sky, searching for any sign of the enemy, but there was nothing. Just the dark, swirling clouds and the distant rumble of thunder. He was alone, or so he thought. Without warning, the Messerschmitt reappeared, emerging from the clouds like a ghost, directly in front of him. My grandfather had no time to react. The planes collided, the impact jarring him violently in his seat. Alarms blared as the Spitfire shuddered, but instead of spiraling towards the ground, something impossible happened. The world around him slowed to a halt. The violent shaking ceased, and he found himself floating in mid-air, his plane frozen in time. The eerie silence was deafening, and as he tried to comprehend what was happening, the cockpit of the Messerschmitt appeared before him once again. The German pilot was there, no longer hollow, but filled with a sorrow that chilled my grandfather to his core. "You took my life," the pilot whispered, his voice barely audible over the static in Harrison's headset. "And now I take yours." A cold dread washed over my grandfather as the realization set in. This was no ordinary encounter. This was retribution, but not in the way he had expected. The planes began to move again, but instead of falling, they drifted together, slowly descending into what seemed like an endless void. As they fell, my grandfather could feel the presence of the German pilot beside him, not in anger, but in a shared understanding of their fates. They were two soldiers, bound by the war that had consumed them, now trapped in a perpetual descent, locked in a never-ending pursuit. The last thing my grandfather remembered before everything went black was the feeling of weightlessness, the sensation of being suspended between life and death, with no escape. When he awoke, he was in a field, his Spitfire a smoldering wreck nearby. He had no memory of how he had survived the crash, but he knew one thing for certain. The war had taken more than just the lives of the men who fought it. It had taken their souls as well. He never flew again after that night. My grandfather's story always left me with an uneasy feeling, as if there was something more to it that he wasn't telling. But every time I asked him about it, he would just shake his head and say, "Some things are better left buried in the past." And maybe he was right.